All right, everyone. It is week 10. Um, that means there's only 5 weeks left. So we're really getting down to the wire. There's only 3 more lessons of content and then a couple of assignments. And then, of course, we have travel coming up in just about 2 months. So getting really close. So this week, as you can see, the topic is natural resource management. Um, So we'll get into what that refers to, but I want to provide first a week 9 review. So remember, we did sustainable buildings. So we went over those 5 passive design solar design principles, which were orientation, overhangs and shading, windows, air sealing, and then the ever elusive thermal mass. And if you remember, the orientation is just the direction that the building is faced. We want to be south facing in the northern hemisphere. You want to have most of your windows on the south side to let the winter sun in. But then you don't want to get all the summer sun because it gets too hot. And so that's why I have that overhang or shading, which the high angle sun will get mostly blocked in the warmer months. But the sun comes in at a lower angle in the winter or the colder months, and so it can get under those overhangs if they're designed properly. Now, this takes a little bit of thought. And then, of course, you want to have a nice, good high levels of insulation, and then you want to have a tight building so you don't want to have a lot of air leakage. Then remember, the thermal mass is the one that, as they say, sort of sets a truly passive design away, truly sets a passive design apart, from just regular high efficient buildings. And the thermal mass is something that basically slowly heats up and cools down. And so in the warmer months, you have like a floor, like an earthen floor, if you remember from that video. Water is a really good thermal mass. Soil is a pretty good thermal mass. And so in the summer, that thermal mass will slowly heat up so the building doesn't get real hot really quickly, and it sort of takes a long time to sort of slowly heat up. And then it's sort of overnight, if it cools down a little bit, it sort of like releases some of that heat out, and then you can open up the windows, and if you design that properly, you kind of get some of that heat out. In the winter, on the other hand, you want that sun, those good south-facing windows, to have the sunlight come through and to have the thermal mass absorb that the solar energy, which then, when it gets cold overnight, it's going to slowly release that heat out into the building to keep the building warmer overnight. So that's your thermal mass. And if you remember, we looked at some ancient cultures that have used some of these principles. So this is not a new concept. We're sort of like getting back to the past or back to the future, or however you want to look at it. And so we're sort of rediscovering these principles. And remember, there is a passive design certification, so that's something worth looking into if you're into this sort of thing. But a truly passively designed home will use very, very little energy to heat or cool. And then we looked at some of these rating systems. Okay, so if you want to know how sustainable a building is, you need a way to measure it. And that's what the LEED system was designed to do. Remember, that's from the late 90s, 1990s. And if you remember, the LEED system is you can get points for all these different sustainable features, everything from renewable energy systems to highly efficient building to low water usage to very clean indoor air quality, like not a lot of those like low VOC paints, and you don't want things off-gassing. Even things like having a bike rack, having access to public transportation, using natural local materials. So there's all kinds of things. Waste management is a big part of that, sustainable landscaping. And so it's a way to sort of measure the sustainability of a building. It's you remember, you pick and choose the features that you want. If you ever design a LEED building, you say like, hey, here's how I want it to be built. And then you work with someone called a LEED AP that's like a consultant basically that's trained to help establish LEED. And they say, okay, well, here's all the points that you would get, and if you want to add these few things, then maybe you'd get more these points, and these sort of like go back and forth with this designer. Okay, so that's your LEED system. Remember, there's the 4 levels. There's just the certified, there's the silver, the gold, and the platinum being the highest. These buildings are all over the place. If you Google LEED buildings, there's actually a website that run by the Green Building Council that shows you all these different LEED buildings across the country. So this is one that's the most common, the one that more people have heard of than any other. Then we have the Living Building Certification. So that is a really robust one. And remember, the two of the big things that distinguish it from LEED are, number one, with LEED, you pick and choose the different things that you want to address. Whereas with Living Building, you have to achieve every single part of the standard. So it's very comprehensive and holistic. That's the first really big difference. The second really big difference is that with LEED, you actually get your LEED certification or whatever certification level you get. It's before you even use the building at all. And in fact, you have to wait to occupy the building until after they get the LEED evaluation done. Whereas Living Building, if you remember, you have to live in or use the building, if it's a commercial building, for 1 year. And then they actually say, okay, did you actually achieve all these standards that you say you were going to achieve? So you really have to prove the sustainability of the building and how it operates and how you use it and everything for a full year in order to get that's Living Building. So it's a really robust standard. Remember, there's also, there's a bunch of aspects to it that are somewhat unique to it. There's the net zero water, net zero energy, basically climate neutral. Any land that you use to build the building has to be set aside, an equal amount has to be set aside in perpetuity, so forever. There's like beauty, there's justice, there's equity, so it's all in there. Really, really robust, and it's really difficult to get. If you get the certification, it's called a living building, and there's very few living buildings that are existing in the world today. So it's supposed to be the most difficult standard to achieve, and it is. And then remember, they use the flower as their symbol, because remember, the flower only uses the water that falls on it and the energy that hits it, right? And so a building, they want it to act kind of like a flower, and also the beauty aspect of it as well. And we looked at some of the externality impacts of buildings. Like, all of these are, basically everything that I mentioned above involves an externality in some way, shape, or form. As a reminder, an externality is the impact of a transaction that occurs to someone that didn't take part in the transaction. And that's something that was addressed in one of the question sets. And I just want to be really clear, in order for it to be an externality, the impact has to occur to someone that had nothing to do with that decision, right? So pollution is a classic example of a negative externality, where if I pollute, I drive to work, I pollute, some pollution coming out of my tailpipe, someone gets sick or partially sick because of that pollution. Well, they didn't make the decision to buy the gas or drive the car, but they were impacted by it. So that's an externality. Another way to think of it is if the price of that impact is not priced into what you paid for that thing. So that person getting sick, I didn't pay for that with the money I paid for the gas. So that's also another way to think of an externality. Then we looked briefly at tiny homes. We will see some of these out in Colorado, so including the one that was in the video, that tiny home village called Beloved Community Village. And so a tiny home is just, the specific definition is 500 square feet or less. So they're all over the place. If you're into this, it's a really good way, if you don't mind living in a smaller space. It's much cheaper both to build and to maintain. I mean, you can order them off of websites now. Multiple websites. I'm not going to name any in particular because I don't support some of them. But you can actually buy these where it's a modular house. So you basically come in and it just sort of folds out and pops up. It's pretty neat. Anyway, tiny home is a really interesting way to sort of minimize your impact, minimize your consumption. The bigger your house, the more stuff you have to fill it. It's just the way it works. So it's a pretty neat way to go. And then we looked finally at cooperative housing, which is something that we don't really do a lot of in the United States. There are a decent amount of tiny homes in the U.S. Cooperative housing hasn't really taken off here. It's much bigger in Europe. So if you remember, cooperative housing is when you share your house with other people. And so the way it normally works is you all live in this, same building, or like maybe it's an apartment building. I've seen these in a couple different places in different countries. And basically, there's a shared common area, kitchen usually, living room, that sort of thing. And then, of course, everyone has their own private space as well. It's kind of like living in an apartment. If you ever lived in an apartment with friends in college or whatever, sort of similar. Like you each have your own bedroom, but then you have a shared common area. A lot of these cooperative housing units have pretty strict rules. Like I know I was a couple in Switzerland where you're not allowed to own a washing machine. Some of them you can't even own a car unless you have a business that requires you to have a car. So there's all different manner of way that you can have these designed and managed. A lot of them provide a lot of shared resource opportunities, like be like a bulletin board says I have whatever, I don't know, a snowblower. And if anybody needs to borrow my snowblower, let me know. Or you can there's like bartering systems where you do this for me and I'll do that for you. So it's a really good way to build community, to reduce your resource impact. People can do it. It's not just for individuals. I've seen families that live in cooperative housing. So anyway, so that's something that maybe you keep your eye out for, and maybe it'll take off someday in the U.S. But there are some cooperative housing around, including in Philadelphia. Okay, so that's our sustainable building lesson review, and then I'm going to post about the Week 10 natural resource management content.